Wednesday. Remember to take care of financial aid. And we did a lookup. We looked up metacognition and how it relates to learning. And then we talked about that a little bit later in the course. We're in week 7. This is day 19 for Intro to Computers. Talked about drive and learning. We actually watched the video again. Then we did some graphics, pictures, images. Talked a little more about iron and lace. And then we talked about, we actually did some spreadsheet work in groups. They got a lot done today in that area. We we mentioned that the project, the due date, moved back to Thursday night at midnight. So students still have an opportunity to ask some questions if they have concerning the project. Drive, Daniel Pink, we watched the video again about motivation, the science now that talks about that and how people are motivated with rewards, and how if it's a cognitive skill, regular rewards don't seem to have as much impact. We related this a little bit to grades. Autonomy, this is from Daniel Pink. Being engaged with the work, mastery, and purpose. If you think about that, it's having some say over your work, working towards mastery, and having the work have a purpose. I again reviewed some concepts. Are you grade-driven, task-driven, or knowledge-driven? And then the students talked about this. We didn't come up with any good answers. In fact, they're may not be necessarily good answers, but we talked about discussing this and so forth. Students, have mentioned things about having to have good grades, get scholarships, and so forth, but knowledge seems to be the key thing that you need. So more on that later. We talked about digital images today. Creating an image with a bunch of ones and zeros, creating a dot or a pixel. Talked about cameras and scanners creating digital images. And then we mentioned iron and lace. We talked about 25 to 50 megabytes per picture, okay, per picture that she takes. And she takes approximately 500 pictures at a set. So you can see we have a lot of items stored. An important thing about pictures that we talked about, the difference between raster graphics and vector graphics. Raster is bitmap. Use a bunch of bits to create the picture. When you resize this, if you make it bigger, typically it gets pixelated or more granular because of the bits are literally further apart. Now, a vector graphic is created using like geometry, if that's a better way to put it, but it's curves and vectors and so forth to create the image. And then when you take a vector image and you make it bigger, it keeps its proportions. So it looks just as good big as it would small. We use NIAC logo. Here. We use the NIAC logo as an example. I have it on the website, and you could take it and make it big and put it on a semi. Adobe Illustrator does vector graphics. Adobe Photoshop does raster graphics. Students then worked on their spreadsheet projects. and told them to make sure they save it and post it again in Canvas Unit 4, not nearly as long as other units, so we should be working on the outline. Project 3 spreadsheet, due tomorrow night, March 1st, Thursday, and I mentioned to the students, we talked about learning today a little bit more, and I emphasized them going back to these assessments and looking through the ones they have wrong, and we're going to take a look at those briefly on Friday, and we'll take a look at them again on Wednesday next week too. We went through a little bit of a PowerPoint, and in there we talked a little bit about, we got to Bloom's taxonomy. The students made some really interesting comments. They talked about school, and they were talking a little bit about high school, and they said, you know, high school ended up being so much more remembering and not as much applying. And now that we're in college, this is important. You need a core. You need to understand things. You need to be able to understand them and relate to them directly from memory. So even though we have access to a huge amount of information with our phones and computers and so forth, there's still a core amount of things. Be able to retrieve and recognize and recall relevant knowledge from memory. But what we want to do is take that to another level. Not only remember things, but constructing meaning from oral, written, graphic messages through interpreting, exemplifying, classifying, summarizing, inferring, comparing, explaining. Do you really understand what we're doing? This is a huge thing when it comes to learning. Striving to understand what we're doing is so important, and then being able to apply it. For example, in spreadsheets, you know, we did a assignment, you're working on a project, and then in class we're applying it to other projects, the skills that we're starting to obtain doing that. And then analyzing, okay? We're going to do a little data analysis as we go along in the course. We'll be analyzing some data, breaking material into parts, determining how the parts relate to one another and to the overall structure. Making judgments, evaluating, and then being creative. This will come up a lot by the end of the course. Being creative in how we distribute information. All right, so today we talked about graphics and the importance of graphics. We'll talk a little more about that, and we'll talk about the web a little bit more on Friday, and we'll do some media stuff on Friday. All right, well, that is it for today.